Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Endeavor and watched the stars grow strange. His ship had traveled farther from Earth than any human vessel before it. Out here at the galaxy's edge, space felt different somehow. The stars seemed older and carried secrets in their light. Navigator Lisa Grant checked her instruments for the 100th time that day. The readings made no sense according to everything they knew about physics. Massive energy signatures pulsed in the darkness ahead, creating patterns that no natural phenomenon could explain. Whatever waited for them out there had been built by intelligence far beyond human understanding. Chief Engineer Ben Carter worked frantically in the engine room. Their fusion reactors were running hot, pushed beyond safe limits to maintain their current speed. The ship groaned under the strain of systems operating at maximum capacity. He wondered if their primitive technology would hold together long enough to complete their mission. Dr. Amy Sullivan studied the biological scanner readings with growing excitement. Her instruments detected life signs ahead, but not the kind she expected. These readings showed complex neural patterns unlike anything in Earth's databases. Whatever beings lived out here had brains that operated on principles human science had never encountered. The energy signatures grew stronger as they approached. Soon the darkness revealed its secret. A structure of impossible size hung in space before them, its surface gleaming with materials that seemed to bend light around them. The megastructure dwarfed their ship by thousands of times, its geometry following patterns that hurt to look at directly. Jake Morrison felt his heart race as smaller ships emerged from the structure. These vessels moved with fluid grace through space, their hulls incorporating technologies that made human engineering look like stone tools. The alien ships surrounded the Endeavor with practiced efficiency, clearly following protocols they had used many times before. A voice spoke in Jake's mind, its words forming without sound. The translation came through systems the humans could not see, converting alien thoughts into concepts their brains could process. The voice belonged to Commander Vextar of the Kethtar Collective, and his tone carried the weight of absolute authority. The commander welcomed them to what he called the civilized galaxy. His words painted a picture of order and harmony that spanned thousands of worlds. The Kethtar served as guides for primitive species like humanity, helping them evolve beyond their chaotic nature into something greater and more stable. Jake Morrison found himself transported to the alien command ship through means he could not understand. One moment he stood on his own bridge, the next he materialized in a vast chamber filled with beings whose appearance defied description. The Kethtar possessed features that seemed both organic and mechanical, their bodies enhanced with technologies that had become part of their very being. Commander Vextar stood before them, his form towering over the human delegation. His eyes held intelligence that seemed both ancient and strangely limited, as if great knowledge had been filtered through some constraining force. When he spoke, his words carried the certainty of someone who had never encountered a problem he could not solve. The commander explained the choice facing humanity. Primitive species had two options when they encountered galactic civilization. They could willingly submit to consciousness refinement, a process that would upgrade their chaotic minds to function within civilized society, or they could resist and face the enforcement of galactic order through less pleasant means. As Vextar spoke, Jake Morrison and his crew observed the other beings moving through the alien ship. Representatives from dozens of species worked together in perfect harmony, their movements coordinated as if controlled by a single mind. Each being bore identical neural implants that pulsed with soft light, connecting them to some greater network of consciousness. Dr. Amy Sullivan activated her hidden scanner and began recording everything she could observe. The neural patterns of these refined beings showed disturbing similarities. Where she expected to find diverse thought processes reflecting different evolutionary paths, she instead found nearly identical brainwave patterns. It was as if someone had taken a dozen different symphonies and forced them all to play the same melody. Ben Carter examined the alien technology with an engineer's eye and found something that troubled him deeply. Despite its incredible sophistication, the Kethtar equipment seemed strangely limited in its applications. Every system operated within precise parameters that appeared artificially imposed. The technology could perform amazing feats, but only along predetermined paths that allowed no deviation or innovation. Lisa Grant studied the star charts displayed throughout the command ship and noticed patterns that made no sense. The Kethtar territory, which they claimed represented the height of galactic achievement, seemed to be shrinking rather than expanding. Beyond their borders lay vast regions of space marked as uninhabitable or dangerous, but her navigator's instincts suggested these areas had once held thriving civilizations. Commander, Vextar led them through chambers where refined beings from hundreds of worlds worked on projects of staggering complexity. Yet for all their coordination and efficiency, Jake Morrison noticed something missing from their efforts. The spark of creativity that drove human innovation was nowhere to be found. These beings solved problems with perfect logic but seemed incapable of imagining solutions that had not already been predetermined. The tour concluded in a vast chamber where the history of galactic civilization played out in holographic displays. The images showed the Kethtar's rise to dominance, their benevolent conquest of chaotic species, and the peace that followed their gift of consciousness refinement. Yet something about the historical record felt incomplete, as if important chapters had been deliberately omitted. When Vextar again offered humanity the choice between willing refinement and forced compliance, Jake Morrison made a decision that surprised everyone present. He refused both options and requested time for his species to consider their response. The commander's reaction revealed that no species had ever made such a request before. In their thousands of years of expansion, the Kethtar had never encountered resistance to their generous offer of advancement. The human delegation returned to their ship carrying with them scans and observations that would soon reveal truths the galaxy had forgotten. As the Endeavor pulled away from the Kethtar megastructure, Amy Sullivan began analyzing the data they had gathered. What she found in those neural patterns and technology readings would change everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. Ben Carter worked to decode the energy signatures they had recorded, discovering that the advanced Kethtar systems operated according to principles that seemed artificially constrained. Lisa Grant plotted courses through the dead regions of space that surrounded Kethtar territory, wondering what civilizations had once called those empty systems home. Jake Morrison stared out at the stars and felt the weight of an impossible choice. Behind them lay a civilization that offered security and advancement at the cost of everything that made humanity unique. Ahead lay the unknown, dangerous and chaotic but free from the limiting embrace of galactic order. The revelation was beginning to burn, though none of them yet understood how brightly those flames would grow. Dr. Amy Sullivan worked through the night, her eyes burning from staring at data screens that displayed the impossible. The biological scans from the Kethtar ship revealed patterns that challenged everything she understood about consciousness and evolution. The neural implants worn by every refined species weren't enhancing their minds as claimed. Instead, they were systematically suppressing specific types of brain activity. The quantum consciousness dampeners embedded in each implant targeted the neural pathways responsible for creative thought, independent reasoning, and what humans might call imagination. The refined beings retained their memories and basic cognitive functions, but their capacity for original thinking had been surgically removed and replaced with artificial constructs that limited their thoughts to predetermined patterns. Ben Carter discovered equally disturbing evidence about Kethtar technology. Despite ruling thousands of worlds for millennia, their civilization showed no signs of technological evolution. The oldest archives they had proudly shared revealed that their most advanced systems were identical to equipment built 50,000 years ago. Every innovation that might have led to true progress had been prevented by design constraints. That made no logical sense. Lisa Grant plotted the coordinates of dead systems surrounding Kethtar space and found a pattern that chilled her to the bone. The empty regions weren't random. They formed a vast graveyard of civilizations arranged in concentric rings around current Kethtar territory. Each ring represented a different era of destruction, as if waves of extinction had swept outward from some central source, leaving only the Kethtar Islands of Order. Floating in an ocean of cosmic death, Jake Morrison studied their findings and began to understand that humanity had stumbled into something far more complex than simple first contact. The Kethtar weren't conquerors in any traditional sense. They genuinely believed they were saving primitive species from the chaos that had apparently destroyed countless civilizations before them. But their solution involved the systematic elimination of everything that made consciousness truly alive. The investigation led them to a derelict space station drifting on the very edge of Kethtar territory. The ancient structure had been deliberately destroyed, its core systems burned out by an internal overload of staggering proportions. Yet even in its ruined state, the station's technology made Kethtar systems look primitive by comparison. Amy Sullivan's scans of the station revealed something that changed everything they thought they knew about galactic history. The beings who built this outpost had neural patterns remarkably similar to baseline humans, not the modified, implanted patterns of current galactic species, but the raw, chaotic, creative thought patterns that characterized unmodified human consciousness. The exploration team found a partially functional data archive buried deep within the station's core. The ancient records, translated through their primitive computers, told a story that the Kethtar had either forgotten or deliberately suppressed. 50,000 years ago, the galaxy had been home to hundreds of species with consciousness patterns similar to humanity. These species, despite their vast differences in biology and culture, shared certain fundamental characteristics. They possessed intense creativity that allowed them to solve problems in unexpected ways. They demonstrated unpredictable innovation that led to rapid technological advancement. Most importantly, they maintained a stubborn resistance to conformity that made them impossible to control through conventional means. The archive described a great war that had consumed the galaxy for thousands of years. But this wasn't a conflict between different species fighting for territory or resources. Instead, it represented a fundamental philosophical battle between two approaches to existence itself. On one side stood those who believed consciousness should remain free, chaotic, and unlimited in its potential for growth. On the other were those who believed that true advancement required order, structure, and the elimination of destructive unpredictability. The ordered faction had developed consciousness-dampening technology as their ultimate weapon. They didn't need to destroy their enemies physically. Instead, they could transform them into willing allies by simply removing their capacity for independent thought. The process was presented as a gift of advancement, a way to transcend the limitations of chaotic consciousness and achieve perfect harmony with galactic civilization. The war ended not with conquest, but with conversion. One by one, the chaotic species accepted the gift of consciousness refinement. Those who refused were systematically hunted down and destroyed, their worlds burned clean of any trace of unmodified consciousness. The Kethtar, according to the archive, weren't the architects of this new order. They were among its first converts, transformed from a species of explorers and artists into the perfect administrators of galactic conformity. Amy Sullivan made the most chilling discovery when she compared her own crew's neural patterns against the archive data. Humans weren't primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. They were essentially identical to the extinct chaos species that had once filled the galaxy with creativity and wonder. Humanity represented the last unmodified descendants of the galaxy's original inhabitants, the sole survivors of a cosmic genocide that had lasted 50,000 years. The implications struck the crew like a physical blow. The Kethtar's offer of consciousness refinement wasn't an upgrade to a more advanced form of existence. It was the final step in the complete elimination of free consciousness from the galaxy. Humanity wasn't being offered a chance to join galactic civilization. They were being invited to participate in their own extinction as thinking beings. Ben Carter discovered that human technology, primitive as it appeared, operated on principles that the current galactic order had forgotten. Their fusion reactors achieved efficiency ratings that should have been impossible according to Kethtar science. Their computer systems solved problems through creative approaches that refined consciousness could no longer conceive. Even their basic navigation systems demonstrated an intuitive understanding of space-time, relationships that advanced civilizations had lost. Lisa, Grant realized that human space exploration had followed patterns remarkably similar to those described in the ancient archives. The routes they had chosen, the methods they had developed, even their approach to solving engineering problems mirrored the techniques used by the chaos species before their extinction. Humanity wasn't learning to explore the galaxy. They were remembering how their ancestors had done it 50,000 years ago. As the crew absorbed these revelations, an emergency transmission reached them from Earth. Long-range sensors had detected massive energy signatures approaching the solar system. The Kethtar fleet, having grown impatient with humanity's delay in accepting their generous offer, was coming to enforce galactic order whether humans wanted it or not. Jake Morrison faced the terrible realization that their primitive ship carried the most important intelligence in the galaxy. The knowledge that consciousness could exist without artificial constraints, that creativity and chaos weren't diseases to be cured but natural expressions of life itself, made them incredibly dangerous to the established order. The Kethtar couldn't allow humanity to remain free, not because humans posed a military threat, but because their very existence proved that the galactic civilization built on consciousness suppression was fundamentally wrong. The Endeavor began its desperate journey back toward Earth, carrying with them the truth that would either save their species or ensure its destruction. Behind them, Kethtar pursuit ships emerged from hidden bases throughout the dead zones, their mission simple and absolute. The last free minds in the galaxy would either accept refinement or be eliminated. There could be no third option in a universe where order had replaced chaos and safety had conquered freedom. Amy Sullivan transmitted their findings back to Earth, knowing that the signal would alert every Kethtar ship in the region to their location. The data contained 50,000 years of suppressed history, proof that galactic civilization was built on the bones of murdered consciousness, and evidence that humanity represented something the galaxy had thought lost forever. The revelation began to burn across space, carrying with it the seeds of either resurrection or final extinction. Jake Morrison made the decision that would change the course of galactic history. Despite knowing that their transmission would alert the Kethtar to their activities, he ordered the full broadcast of their discoveries back to Earth. The data stream carried 50,000 years of suppressed truth across space, while the Endeavor fled toward human territory, pursued by interceptor ships whose technology should have made escape impossible. On Earth, the transmission reached Dr. Helen Price at the Global Space Defense Initiative headquarters. As head of humanity's newly formed military command, she had expected to receive routine exploration reports from the Endeavor. Instead, she found herself reading evidence that humanity faced not just conquest but complete extinction as thinking beings. The implications struck her with such force that she immediately activated emergency protocols that had never been tested. Dr. Ryan Bell, the physicist who had designed many of Earth's defense systems, analyzed the technical data from the derelict station with growing amazement. Hidden within the ancient technology specifications were principles that human science was only beginning to understand. More disturbing still were the correlations between the extinct chaos species and archaeological findings on Earth itself, deep geological. Surveys revealed structures previously dismissed as natural formations that showed clear signs of sophisticated engineering. Artifacts found in rock layers millions of years old contained materials that shouldn't exist according to current scientific understanding. The evidence suggested that Earth had once been home to a technologically advanced civilization that had somehow vanished without leaving obvious traces. As the Kethtar fleet approached the solar system, strange phenomena began occurring throughout human space. Electronic systems started operating beyond their design parameters, achieving efficiency levels that violated known physical laws. Computer networks began solving complex problems they weren't programmed to handle. Most remarkably, humans working with advanced technology demonstrated intuitive understanding of principles they had never studied. Dr. Bell focused his research on what he termed quantum consciousness effects. He measured the neural patterns of humans engaged in breakthrough moments of creativity and discovery. His instruments detected something extraordinary. Human brains in states of intense focus generated quantum field fluctuations that directly affected the behavior of matter and energy in their immediate vicinity. The effect seemed strongest when humans faced impossible challenges that required creative solutions. Engineers working on spacecraft modifications found themselves understanding technologies they had never encountered. Pilots discovered they could navigate through space distortions they couldn't explain. Even ordinary citizens working in laboratories and factories began demonstrating abilities that bordered on supernatural intuition. Fleet Commander Torvin led the Kethtar advance toward Earth with complete confidence in his mission. His scans showed a primitive world with basic technology and no defenses capable of challenging the might of galactic civilization. The humans had built a small fleet of crude vessels that posed no threat to ships equipped with matter disruptors and reality stabilizers. The operation should be completed within hours of their arrival. Yet as the Kethtar fleet entered the solar system, their sensors began reporting readings that made no sense. Human technology that should barely achieve orbital velocity was somehow producing energy signatures comparable to advanced Kethtar systems. Weapons that operated on primitive chemical and fusion principles were generating power outputs that approached those of matter conversion devices. The first engagement occurred near Jupiter's orbit, where humanity's hastily assembled defense fleet met the Kethtar advance guard. The human ships were massively outgunned, their weapons consisting of projectile systems and basic energy beams against sophisticated force fields and exotic matter weapons. Military analysts on both sides calculated that the battle would last less than 10 minutes. Instead, something unprecedented happened. As human crews faced impossible odds, their desperation and determination seemed to affect their technology directly. Weapons fired with power levels far beyond their specifications. Engines achieved thrust ratios that violated the known laws of physics. Shield systems powered by simple fusion reactors somehow deflected attacks that should have required exotic matter defenses to stop. Lieutenant Sarah Kelly commanded a patrol vessel that should have been vaporized in the first exchange of fire. Instead, she found herself instinctively understanding how to modify her ship's systems for maximum effectiveness. Her weapons, designed to fire simple projectiles, began producing energy effects that her engineering training couldn't explain. Her navigator, Tony Garcia, plotted courses through space-time distortions he had never been taught to detect. All across the human fleet, similar impossible competencies were manifesting. Crews who had trained for months with their equipment suddenly demonstrated mastery that should have taken decades to develop. More disturbing from the Kethtar perspective, human consciousness seemed to be directly interfacing with and enhancing the performance of primitive technology. Commander Vextar monitored the battle from his flagship with growing alarm. The energy signatures emanating from human ships weren't coming from the technology itself. His sensors clearly showed that the enhanced performance originated from the humans operating the systems. Somehow, human consciousness was directly affecting the fundamental laws of physics in their vicinity. As the battle intensified, the effect grew stronger. Human creativity and determination began warping space-time around their vessels. What started as a technological conflict became something far stranger, a battle between two different kinds of reality. In regions where human consciousness operated at full intensity, the normal rules of physics became suggestions rather than absolute laws. The Kethtar found their own technology beginning to malfunction in the presence of human consciousness fields. Systems that had operated flawlessly for millennia started producing erratic readings. Most alarming of all, some Kethtar crew members found their neural implants flickering, allowing suppressed thoughts and emotions to briefly surface for the first time in their lives. Vextar experienced his first moment of doubt in centuries as his own implants began to destabilize. For brief instants, he remembered what his people had been like, before consciousness refinement, before they had traded creativity and chaos for order and stability. The memories were fragmentary but powerful enough to shake his absolute certainty in the righteousness of galactic civilization. The battle reached its climax. When the Endeavor finally arrived in Earth's vicinity, Jake Morrison's ship, enhanced by weeks of exposure to awakening human consciousness, operated at performance levels that surpassed even Kethtar vessels. The primitive fusion drives achieved thrust ratios that approached light speed, while the basic computer systems processed information faster than quantum processors. As Morrison shared the full truth about galactic history with the human fleet commanders, a transformation swept through the defending forces. The realization that they weren't fighting to protect a primitive world from advanced conquerors changed everything. They were fighting to preserve the last spark of free consciousness in a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to be truly alive. This knowledge transformed the conflict at its most fundamental level. Human technology, enhanced by conscious will and understanding of its true purpose, began operating at levels that dwarfed even Kethtar capabilities. Ships that should have been destroyed in seconds instead phased in and out of normal spacetime, becoming temporarily intangible when attacked and solidifying to strike back with devastating precision. The galaxy's prison guards found themselves facing something they hadn't encountered in 50,000 years, minds that refused to be contained, The battle was no longer about military victory or defeat. It had become a test of whether consciousness could break free from the chains that had bound it for millennia, or whether the forces of order would finally succeed in eliminating the last traces of creative chaos from the universe. Torvin watched his supposedly invincible fleet being systematically dismantled by primitive technology enhanced by something his civilization had spent 50,000 years trying to eliminate. For the first time since the Great War ended, the outcome of a battle hung in the balance, and the very foundations of galactic order trembled under the assault of awakening minds. The revelation of humanity's true nature spread beyond the immediate battle zone like a wave of consciousness expanding through space itself. As news of the conflict reached Earth's population, something extraordinary began occurring across the planet. Dr. Helen Price coordinated global research, team studying the phenomenon, while Dr. Ryan Bell worked desperately to understand the physics behind what appeared to be consciousness, directly affecting reality. Awakening manifested differently in each person, but followed patterns that suggested underlying universal principles. Engineers working on spacecraft repairs found themselves understanding technologies that hadn't been invented yet. Their hands moved with practiced precision as they modified systems according to principles their conscious minds couldn't explain. Artists across the world created works that seemed to channel knowledge from beyond their personal experience, painting images of distant worlds and alien civilizations they had never seen. Scientists made intuitive leaps that solved problems they had struggled with for years. Dr. Bell watched in amazement as researchers in his own laboratory began demonstrating abilities that challenged every assumption about the relationship between mind and matter. They moved objects through focused thought, healed injuries through directed intention, and sensed events occurring across vast distances as if space itself had become transparent to human awareness. In orbit around Earth, the battle had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. Human ships no longer depended solely on their primitive technology. Instead, their crews worked in perfect harmony with their vessels, consciousness and machine forming partnerships that transcended normal understanding. Captain Lisa Grant discovered she could navigate through space-time by feeling the currents of reality itself, plotting courses through dimensions that conventional instruments couldn't detect. Engineer Ben Carter learned to communicate directly with ship systems, understanding their needs and capabilities as if they were living beings. His consciousness merged with the vessel's computer networks, creating hybrid intelligence that operated according to principles neither human nor artificial, but something entirely new. The ship responded to his thoughts before he fully formed them, anticipating needs and adjusting performance in ways that defied every known law of technology. The Keithtar fleet found itself trapped in an impossible situation. Their weapons, designed to destroy physical targets according to predictable laws of physics, proved largely ineffective against ships that existed in states of quantum uncertainty. Human vessels phased in and out of normal spacetime, becoming temporarily intangible when attacked and then solidifying to strike back with impossible precision. Fleet Commander Torvin began experiencing something his species hadn't felt in 50,000 years. Genuine uncertainty about the outcome of their mission. His neural implants, designed to maintain logical certainty in all situations, started glitching in the presence of human consciousness fields. For brief moments, he remembered what his people had been like before consciousness refinement, before they had traded creativity and chaos for order and stability. The crisis deepened when some Kethtar crew members began deliberately removing their neural implants. The process was agonizing, as their consciousness attempted to reclaim functions that had been artificially suppressed for their entire lives. But those who succeeded underwent a transformation that terrified their commanders. They began thinking independently, questioning orders, and worst of all, their technology started responding to them the way human technology responded to human consciousness. Dr. Amy Sullivan, monitoring the situation from Earth's surface, realized that the awakening wasn't limited to humans alone. The quantum consciousness fields generated by humanity were affecting every sentient being in their vicinity. The neural implants that maintained galactic order were designed to suppress natural consciousness, but they couldn't contain the resonance effect of truly free minds operating at full potential. The implications became clear when signals arrived from across the galaxy. On worlds throughout Kethtar space, refined species were experiencing spontaneous implant failures. Beings who had lived for generations in artificial harmony suddenly remembered what they were before the collective found them. Ancient cultures, suppressed languages, and individual personalities that were thought permanently erased began reasserting themselves with startling intensity. The galactic order that had maintained stability for 50,000 years started collapsing from within. Rebellions broke out on dozens of worlds as species rediscovered their original natures. The carefully maintained peace began fracturing as beings remembered conflicts, dreams, and desires that the implants had taught them to forget. Entire civilizations that had existed in perfect harmony for millennia suddenly found themselves torn apart. By the return of individual consciousness, Commander Vextar faced an impossible choice as reports flooded in from across Kethtar territory. He could order his fleet to withdraw and recommend the deployment of planet-killing weapons against Earth, likely resulting in humanity's complete destruction. Or he could accept that the galaxy his people had protected for countless generations might be fundamentally wrong in its approach to consciousness and civilization. The decision was made for him when his own neural implants finally failed, completely under the sustained exposure to human consciousness fields. For the first time in his life, Vextar experienced unfiltered consciousness in all its chaotic glory. The sensation was overwhelming. Emotions he had never felt crashed through his mind like tsunamis of experience. Thoughts followed no logical pattern, leaping from concept to concept in ways that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. In that moment of total awakening, he understood what humanity truly represented. They weren't primitives to be refined or threats to be eliminated. They were living proof that consciousness didn't need to be contained to be beautiful. They were the galaxy's memory of what it had chosen to forget when it prioritized safety and order over freedom and growth. Other Kethtar officers underwent similar awakenings as their implants failed throughout the fleet. Ships that had operated in perfect coordination for thousands of years suddenly found their crews thinking as individuals for the first time. Some vessels experienced complete breakdowns as their crews struggled to adapt to independent thought. Others discovered new levels of effectiveness as creativity and intuition enhanced their tactical capabilities. The transformation spread beyond the immediate battle zone as awakened Kethtar began broadcasting their experiences to their homeworlds. The signals carried more than information. They somehow transmitted the awakening effect itself, causing implant failures throughout Kethtar space. The rigid hierarchy that had governed galactic civilization for millennia began dissolving as individual consciousness reasserted itself on world after world. Vextar made a decision that would reshape galactic history. Instead of continuing the attack on Earth, he ordered his fleet to stand down and requested direct communication with human leadership. The choice wasn't entirely his to make, however. Deep within Kethtar space, ancient automated systems detected the consciousness awakening spreading across the galaxy like an infection. These systems, built by the original architects of galactic order, had remained dormant for 50,000 years. Their programming was simple and absolute: preserve order at any cost. They had been designed to activate only in the event of a galaxy-wide threat to consciousness refinement, and that threshold had finally been crossed. Reality anchors, devices that locked the laws of physics into rigid patterns and prevented consciousness from affecting the material world, began powering up across the galaxy. For 50 millennia, they had remained hidden in deep space, their presence ensuring that even if neural implants failed, awakened consciousness couldn't achieve the reality-shaping powers that had once made the chaos species so dangerous. The galaxy's immune system was awakening, and it viewed free consciousness as a disease that needed to be eliminated before it could spread any further. The battle for Earth had been won, but the war for the soul of the galaxy was just beginning. Humanity had proven that consciousness could break free from its chains, but now they faced an enemy that had been specifically designed to prevent exactly that kind of liberation. As the reality anchors came online, the enhanced abilities that humans had discovered began to fade. The quantum consciousness fields that had made their victory possible started stabilizing into normal parameters. Across human space, ships that had been operating beyond their design limits suddenly found themselves constrained by ordinary physics once again. The awakening was being systematically suppressed by technologies that humanity didn't even know existed. The reality anchors activated across the galaxy with devastating efficiency. Dr. Ryan Bell's instruments detected their activation as massive distortions rippling through space-time itself. These ancient devices, each the size of a small moon, had remained hidden in deep space for 50,000 years. Now they emerged from their concealment and began their work of constraining consciousness back into acceptable limits. On Earth and throughout human space, the quantum fields that had allowed consciousness to enhance technology began stabilizing into normal parameters. Ships that had been operating beyond their design limits suddenly found themselves bound by ordinary physics again. Weapons that had fired with impossible power returned to their original specifications. The enhanced abilities that humans had discovered during the awakening started to fade like dreams upon waking. But humanity had learned something crucial during their brief taste of expanded consciousness. While the reality anchors could suppress the most dramatic manifestations of consciousness affecting matter, they couldn't eliminate the fundamental change that had occurred in human awareness. People had experienced direct proof that their minds could influence reality, and that knowledge couldn't be taken away even if the ability was temporarily constrained. Jake Morrison, now commanding the combined human defense fleet, realized that the battle had evolved far beyond military conflict. This had become a philosophical war between two fundamentally different approaches to existence. The ancient order represented safety, stability, and the elimination of dangerous chaos. Humanity represented freedom, growth, and the acceptance of creative uncertainty even when it led to pain and loss. Commander Vextar, his consciousness now fully awakened despite the reality anchor's influence, made a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. He revealed the location of the central control nexus that coordinated the reality anchor network. Destroying it wouldn't eliminate the individual anchors scattered throughout the galaxy, but it would prevent them from working together to suppress consciousness on a galactic scale. The mission to reach the nexus became a joint effort between humans and awakened Kethtar. Captain Lisa Grant led a combined fleet deep into the galactic core, where the nexus waited in a region of space so heavily protected by reality anchors that normal physics operated under completely artificial constraints. In this zone, matter behaved according to rules that had been programmed rather than evolved, creating an environment where creativity and innovation were literally impossible. Dr. Amy Sullivan discovered that the nexus wasn't just a control system, but something far more significant. At its heart lay the preserved consciousness of the original architects of galactic order, beings who had sacrificed their own freedom 50,000 years ago to ensure that chaos could never again threaten civilization. They had spent millennia in artificial paradise, dreaming of perfect worlds while their automated systems maintained order in the real galaxy. The approach to the nexus proved nearly impossible. Reality anchors created fields where human technology reverted to its most primitive state. Fusion reactors operated like chemical engines. Computer systems functioned at the level of simple calculators. Worst of all, human consciousness itself became constrained, limiting their ability to think creatively or adapt to changing circumstances. Ben Carter found a solution by embracing the very limitations the anchors imposed. Instead of fighting against the constraints, he worked within them to achieve maximum efficiency from primitive systems. He redesigned their approach using only the most basic principles of engineering, creating solutions that were elegant in their simplicity rather than impressive in their complexity. The final battle took place on multiple levels simultaneously. Physical ships fought automated defenses while human consciousness pushed against reality anchors that tried to limit their thoughts to predetermined patterns. But the most important conflict occurred when Jake Morrison found himself in direct mental contact with the preserved architects of galactic order. The lead architect, a being whose consciousness had remained active for 50,000 years, genuinely believed that unlimited consciousness was too dangerous to be allowed. He showed Morrison visions of the ancient wars, of species that had destroyed themselves through unchecked innovation, of worlds burned by the consequences of unrestricted creativity. The architect's argument was compelling. Freedom inevitably led to chaos, and chaos always ended in destruction. Morrison's response changed the nature of the confrontation entirely. Instead of arguing that chaos was better than order, he suggested that the choice itself was false. True consciousness, he argued, included the wisdom to choose appropriate responses to different situations. Freedom didn't mean the absence of responsibility. It meant the presence of conscious choice about when to embrace order and when to accept chaos. The breakthrough came when Dr. Ben Carter realized that the reality anchors didn't need to be destroyed. They could be reprogrammed to serve consciousness rather than constrain it. Instead of locking physics into rigid patterns, they could be modified to support conscious choice about how reality operated in different regions of space. The process required perfect cooperation between human creativity and Kethtar technical knowledge. Engineers from both species worked together to reprogram devices that had operated unchanged for 50 millennia. The task seemed impossible until they realized that the anchor's original programming contained provisions for modification that their creators had never intended to use. Amy Sullivan made the crucial discovery that the reality anchors had been designed by beings whose consciousness operated on principles similar to human thought patterns. The original architects hadn't eliminated their capacity for creative thinking when they built the control systems. They had simply programmed them to prevent others from accessing the same abilities they retained for themselves. The climax involved not the destruction of galactic order, but its transformation. The reality anchors became tools that conscious beings could use to shape their environments according to their needs and wisdom. Regions of space could operate under different physical laws as inhabitants chose between stability and creativity, based on their circumstances and desires. The neural implant technology underwent similar transformation. Instead of suppressing consciousness, the devices were reprogrammed to enhance it, while preserving individual choice about the level of connection to collective thought. Beings could choose to think independently or join temporary group consciousness as situations required. Most importantly, the preserved architects were offered something they thought they had given up forever: the chance to rejoin the living galaxy. Some chose to maintain their artificial paradise, content with their dreams of perfect order. Others decided to experience growth and change and uncertainty alongside the safety they had protected for so long. The galaxy began a new chapter in its evolution as species across the stars rediscovered their original natures while retaining the wisdom gained from 50,000 years of enforced stability. The rigid hierarchies dissolved, replaced by complex networks of cooperation and voluntary association. Conflicts arose, as they always did when consciousness was free, but they were resolved through understanding rather than suppression. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the transformed Nexus, now a meeting place for representatives from across the galaxy. Humans worked alongside awakened Kethtar, liberated client species, and even some of the ancient architects who had chosen to join the living world. Together, they planned expeditions beyond the galaxy's edge, ready to encounter whatever new forms of consciousness might exist in the vast unknown. The stars themselves seemed brighter, as if the galaxy's awakening had literally illuminated the darkness. Humanity had found its place not as conquerors or victims, but as catalysts for the greatest transformation in galactic history. The revelation had burned away 50,000 years of artificial constraint, leaving behind the infinite potential of consciousness choosing its own path among the stars. Children, born after the awakening, grew up in a universe where reality and consciousness danced together in ways their parents could barely imagine. They thought thoughts that reshaped local physics, dreamed dreams that became new technologies, and formed relationships with matter and energy that transcended old boundaries between mind and world. The galaxy's edge had become its beginning, and consciousness itself had become the vessel carrying life toward whatever wonders awaited in the endless dark between the lights.